Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everybody. We are from Group 5. I'm Regan Ratna and my friend Indra Rizkiani. Today, we will discuss about language change in social perspective. The first topic is dialectology and language change. Dialectology is the study of the way sounds, words, and grammatical forms vary within a language. The term is usually used to describe the study both of accents, the varying sounds used within a language, and dialects, the differing grammatical structures and words used. On the whole, dialectology has focused on the geographical distribution of different accents and dialects, though it has begun to investigate social factors such as age, gender, and position in society too. Dialect and accent are two different aspects of language. However, there are some overlaps. An accent is also specific to a region. In English, there might be an American, British, or Australian accent. An accent is an inflection that occurs with word pronunciation. And a dialect is entirely different words or ways of communicating altogether. Dialect is more than a pronunciation. Or we can say that an accent is the way that particular person or group of people sound. It's the way somebody pronounces words, the musicality of their speech, etc. And a dialect describes both a person's accent and the grammatical features of the way that person talks. Here are some examples of dialect. A Northern American might say hello. A Southern American might say howdy. Someone from the East Coast might say what's poppin'? And a Southern American would understand this, but would probably never say it. Someone from the South might say, how are you all? A Northeastern American would understand this, but would probably never say it. This slide is the example of accent. We can see that British and American has different accent, and it has different pronunciations. The example is the word answer. In British, it's called answer, and in American, it's called answer. That's the difference of accents. The best dialect for a country's standard language is very often the original dialect of the capital and its environs. Example, in France, Paris; in England, London; in Russia, Moscow. Or the base may be a strong economic and cultural center; in Italy, Florence. Or the language may be a combination of several regional dialects as are German and Polish. Even a standard language that was originally based on one local dialect changes, however, as elements of other dialects infiltrate into it over the years. The actual development in any one linguistic area depends on historical events. Sometimes, even the distribution of standard languages may not correspond to the dialectal situation. In most developed countries, the majority of the population has an active or at least passive command of the standard language. They speak their maternal dialect at home and with friends and acquaintances in casual contexts, and they use the standard language in more formal situations. The use of this type of language is supported by psychological factors such as feelings of solidarity with a certain region and pride in its traditions, or the relaxed mood connected with informal behavior. The next topic is the relationship between change and variation. Language variation. Language variations means regional, social, or contextual difference in the way a particular language is used. Since the rise of sociolinguistics in the 1960s, interest in linguistic variations has developed rapidly. We now realize that a variation, far from being peripheral and consequential, is a vital part of ordinary linguistic behavior. Language varies in many dimensions, some of which are as follows: geographical, social, style, and function. Language varies with distance. It is said that language changes after every 10 miles. All aspects of language, including phonemes, morphemes, syntactic structure, and meaning, are subject to variation. Language varies at three levels: pronunciation level, grammatical level, vocabulary level. The varieties of language. What make one variety of language different from another is the linguistic items that it includes. So, we may define a variety of language as a set of linguistic items with similar social distribution. This definition allows us to call any of the following as varieties of language: English, French, London English, English of football commentaries, the language or languages used by a particular person. Types of language change. The first is lexical and semantic change. Lexical change refers to people using different words today than people from the past. A semantic change is very closely linked to a lexical change, but semantic change has something to do with changes in meaning behind words. For example, an older person would use the word wireless to mean radio, whereas the word wireless would certainly mean wireless technology such as phones and laptops for a younger person. And for the semantic change, which is also known as semantic shift, describes the evolution of word usage. In semantic change, the modern meaning of the word is different from the original usage. For the example, the word guy was used as a term for any person of grotesque appearance, and then to a general reference for a male person. However, in the 20th century, under the influence of American popular culture, the word guy has been gradually replacing fellow, bloke, chap, and now in plural, it refers to a mixture of genders. Like, for the example, come on, you guys, could be directed to a group of men and women. And then syntax change or grammar. English syntax is very slow to change compared with vocabulary change, which can be seen as fairly superficial and ephemeral. Modern English grammar is different from Old English in many aspects. One example would be Old English distinguished gender. The third person singular demonstrative nominative pronoun had three forms. She was the masculine form, pied was neuter form, and so was the feminine form. However, in modern English, there is only one form of the third person singular demonstrative pronoun, that regardless of case of gender. And then phonological change or the sound. Sound change consists of the practice of language change which causes the phonetic change of or phonological change. It also includes the substitution of phonetic feature which lead to the total loss of the original sound and a new one is introduced. And then spelling change. There are regulatory organizations to preserve national languages in many countries, but neither the US nor Great Britain have such regulatory bodies in place. The English language changes with the publication of new dictionaries, or the way media uses language, or with the creation of colloquial terms. When talking about change in English spelling, it is also essential to discuss about the difference between British and American English spellings. The Frank influence on English has caused many of the spelling differences between British and English. British English has a tendency to keep the spelling of many words of Frank origin, whereas American try to spell words more closely to the way they sound phonetically.
Using the present to explain the past and the past to explain the present. Chapter 2, 3, and 4 discuss studies with evidence both for women being in the figure of change to a more prestigious language or variety, as well as their being laggard in their use of a vernacular language or non-standard variety. Many 19th 19th and 20th century dialectologists investigating European language based their surveys almost entirely on the speech of men, some on the assumption that men better perceived the real and purest forms of the regional dialects they were interested in collecting. Most of the linguistic items whose geographical distribution was being mapped were associated with men's rather than women's lifestyles and roles. For example, terms for farming implements. In a similar ad hoc explanation, French women were blamed for the loss of R in the word for chair, since it was a domestic object which belonged more naturally to the speech of women. Faced with seemingly contradictory findings and much ad hoc speculation about the role of women in language change, investigators of language shift have moved on from simplistic correlation between language use and sex to focus on the symbolic and ideological dimension of language. This allows us to understand how a vernacular language or non-standard speech variety may become linked to stigmatized ethnic identity, so that a subordinate group may abandon their language in favor of the dominant one, invested with greater symbolic capital. Change in real versus apparent time. Age affects the language. A study of Tunisian women in Morocco showed that older women categorically use diphthongs aw and ach, while middle-aged women alternate between diphthongs and monophthongs. Only then can we tell if contemporary variation, or what we might call change in apparent time, is a stage in long-term change or change in real time. One of the first demonstrations of age grading in the transmission of change is found in a study done in the Swiss village of Charmy in 1905. The middle-aged generation of speakers fluctuated with respect to the use of both old and new norms as exemplified in the speech of the older and younger generation respectively. In Britain, however, the most local dialects were associated with the groups at the lower end of the social hierarchy, while those at the top spoke RP, which showed no trace of regionalism. Research demonstrated that most of the dialect differences in the United States had their basis partly in regional varieties of British English, which earlier settlers brought with them. Thus, an item showing a broad regional pattern in England became narrowly local in the United States. There is linguistic evidence for a historical connection between American speech of the North and West and of the Northern England, and to some extent the South and the pronunciation of Southern England. Language change and social ideology. Language change for a variety of reasons such as political pressures, technological development, as well as social, culture, and moral factors. Below are the examples of causes that lead to change in the English language. First, political factor, which is caused by foreign invasion, migration, and colonization. Second, social factor, which means foreign influences from Latin, French, American, Australian, Indian, and others. Cultural factor as the next. This means the exposure of one language group to another via television, radio, films, music, magazine, and fashion. And fourth, technological factor, which means rapid advance in information technology, industries, product, and economy. And the last, moral factor, which is about the recent developments in anti-racism and environmentalism.